Stop being an emotional fool. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk to you today about something that we all face at some point in our lives: emotional foolishness. We've all been there, acting on impulse, allowing our feelings to control our actions, and making decisions we later regret. We've all been emotional fools at one time or another. The truth is, it's easy to fall into the trap of letting our emotions dictate our behavior. But the real challenge and the real growth comes when we learn to manage them, rather than being controlled by them. Emotions are an inevitable part of being human. They shape our experiences, influence our decisions, and can sometimes overwhelm us if we're not careful. The first step in managing your emotions and avoiding being an emotional fool is to acknowledge them. Too often, people either suppress or deny what they're feeling, thinking that it's easier to ignore their emotions than to confront them. But this approach can lead to greater problems down the road. When we don't acknowledge our emotions, they tend to control us, affecting our relationships, our decision-making, and even our physical health. To acknowledge your emotions means to recognize and accept what you're feeling in the moment. It requires honesty with yourself about the emotions you're experiencing, without judgment or self-criticism. The truth is, every emotion has a purpose, whether it's happiness, anger, sadness, fear, or frustration. Emotions are like signals from within, guiding us to understand ourselves better. They give us valuable insight into our needs, desires, and even our boundaries. When we take the time to acknowledge them, we're better able to respond in ways that align with our true selves. One of the biggest challenges people face when it comes to emotions is the discomfort that often accompanies them. Negative emotions, in particular, can make us feel vulnerable or exposed. Fear can make us retreat, anger can lead to rash decisions, and sadness can cause us to isolate ourselves. These emotions are all uncomfortable, and it's easy to want to push them away, believing that if we ignore them, they'll go away. But the truth is, when we try to suppress our emotions, they don't vanish. They only resurface later, often more intense and more difficult to manage. I think of emotions like a pressure cooker. If you keep adding heat and refuse to release the steam, eventually the pressure becomes too much, and the cooker will explode. Similarly, when we refuse to acknowledge or express our emotions, they can build up over time until they eventually erupt in unhealthy ways, whether through outbursts of anger, emotional breakdowns, or self-destructive behaviors. This is why it's so crucial to recognize our emotions early on and deal with them constructively. Acknowledging emotions doesn't mean that you act on every feeling right away. In fact, taking a step back and reflecting on what you're feeling is an important part of emotional awareness. It's about giving yourself permission to feel without acting impulsively. For example, if you feel angry, you might have the urge to lash out at someone. But rather than acting on that impulse, acknowledging the anger gives you the space to understand it. Ask yourself, why am I angry? Is it because of something this person did, or is there a deeper issue at play? Is this anger disproportionate to the situation? When we take the time to explore our emotions, we give ourselves the chance to respond more thoughtfully and less reactively. Another reason that acknowledging your emotions is so powerful is that it allows you to understand your triggers. Every person has specific situations, people, or events that evoke certain emotional responses. Some people may feel overwhelmed by stress at work, others might feel neglected in relationships, and still others may get frustrated by unmet expectations. By paying attention to these emotional triggers, you gain insight into what's really going on beneath the surface. For example, if you notice that you're frequently getting upset when your partner is late, it may not just be about their tardiness, it might be related to feelings of abandonment or insecurity that you haven't fully processed. By acknowledging the emotion, you begin to uncover the underlying issue that needs to be addressed. When we acknowledge our emotions, we're also giving ourselves permission to be human. Emotions are part of the human experience, and it's okay to feel them. Too often, we're taught to suppress emotions, especially the so-called negative ones. We're told to be strong, to push through, and to never let emotions get in the way of our goals. But this kind of thinking can be harmful, leading to feelings of shame, frustration, and confusion. Emotions like sadness, anger, and fear are not signs of weakness, they are natural responses to life's challenges. When we acknowledge them, we allow ourselves to fully experience our humanity and learn from it. Acknowledging your emotions also fosters emotional maturity. When you can identify what you're feeling, it becomes easier to manage those emotions in a healthy way. Emotional maturity isn't about denying your feelings or pretending they don't exist. It's about developing the wisdom to handle them in ways that support your growth. This means being honest with yourself, expressing emotions constructively, and seeking support when needed. By acknowledging your emotions, you begin to take control of your emotional state instead of allowing your emotions to control you. In the long term, the practice of acknowledging your emotions can lead to greater emotional resilience. Life is full of ups and downs, and while we can't always control what happens to us, we can control how we respond. By learning to acknowledge and manage our emotions, we build the resilience needed to navigate life's challenges with more grace and composure. This emotional strength allows us to face difficult situations head-on, make decisions based on logic and clarity rather than fear or frustration, and ultimately become more empowered in our lives. And in conclusion, acknowledging your emotions is the first and most important step in mastering them. It's not about letting your emotions run wild or being ruled by them. It's about recognizing what you feel, understanding where it's coming from, and using that insight to guide your actions. By embracing your emotions with honesty and self-compassion, you take the power back from them. You begin to act with intention, rather than reacting impulsively. And in doing so, you stop being an emotional fool, and instead become the wise, self-aware person you are meant to be. We live in a fast-paced world where everything is immediate. From social media notifications to work demands, we're constantly bombarded with stimuli that require quick responses. In many situations, it seems as if we must react quickly, but this urgency often leads to impulsive decisions driven by emotions rather than thoughtful consideration. One of the most valuable skills you can develop in life is the ability to pause before reacting. This simple act of stopping, taking a breath, and giving yourself time to think can profoundly impact the decisions you make and how you handle your emotions. When we feel a surge of emotion, whether it's anger, frustration, anxiety, or excitement, our first instinct is often to react. Emotions can be powerful forces that cloud our judgment, prompting us to act impulsively without fully understanding the situation. In these moments, it's easy to say or do things we later regret, which can hurt relationships, damage reputations, or create unnecessary stress. By pausing before reacting, you allow yourself the opportunity to process your emotions, reflect on the situation, and make a more conscious, deliberate choice about how to proceed. The problem with impulsive reactions is that they are typically driven by our emotional state, which can be fleeting and irrational. For example, when you're angry, you might lash out at someone without considering the consequences of your words. Similarly, if you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, you might make hasty decisions that prioritize immediate relief over long-term benefit. These knee-jerk reactions are often driven by feelings that are temporary, and once the emotion fades, you may realize that your reaction was disproportionate to the situation. The damage, however, may have already been done. By pausing before reacting, you prevent this cycle of emotional reactivity and create space for more measured responses. Pausing doesn't mean avoiding the emotion or pretending it doesn't exist. Emotions are a natural part of being human, and they carry important information about our needs, desires, and boundaries. However, when we give ourselves a moment to pause, we allow the intensity of the emotion to settle before we respond. This gives us the chance to evaluate the situation from a clearer perspective, reducing the likelihood that we will act out of frustration, anger, or other fleeting emotions. The act of pausing can be as simple as taking a few deep breaths before responding to someone, counting to 10, or even stepping away from a situation that's triggering strong emotions. It doesn't have to be a long pause, just enough time to regain a sense of calm and objectivity. This brief moment of reflection allows you to assess your emotional state and ask yourself key questions. Why am I feeling this way? What do I really need in this moment? What outcome do I hope to achieve? Am I reacting to the situation, or am I projecting something from my past onto it? By answering these questions, you begin to separate your emotional impulses from your more rational thoughts. One of the key benefits of pausing is that it allows you to create emotional distance between yourself and the situation. This emotional distance gives you the ability to evaluate the situation more objectively. Without a pause, your immediate reaction can be colored by anger, frustration, or anxiety, making it difficult to see things clearly. By taking a moment to breathe and calm yourself, you begin to view the situation from a broader perspective, making it easier to see all sides of the issue and understand the motivations of others involved. This emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring about the situation, rather, it allows you to approach it with greater clarity and wisdom. Additionally, pausing before reacting helps you to avoid making decisions that are influenced by past experiences or assumptions. Often, our emotional responses are shaped by our history, past hurts, fears, and unresolved conflicts rather than the present situation. For example, if you've been betrayed in the past, you might feel a surge of distrust when someone else seems to act in a way that reminds you of that betrayal. Without pausing to reflect, you may project your past experiences onto the current situation, which can lead to overreacting or misjudging others. By taking a step back, you can assess whether your emotional response is truly related to the current circumstances or if it's being influenced by your past. In addition to emotional clarity, pausing before reacting gives you the opportunity to consider the potential consequences of your actions. When you react impulsively, you often act without thinking about how your response will impact the people around you or the outcome of the situation. Taking a pause helps you to reflect on the potential consequences and ensure that your response aligns with your long-term values and goals. It allows you to act in a way that is consistent with who you want to be, rather than being swayed by momentary emotions. Pausing also promotes better communication. When emotions are running high, it can be easy to speak in a way that's defensive, dismissive, or hostile. A pause gives you the space to choose your words more carefully and respond in a way that promotes understanding rather than escalating the conflict. By taking a moment to think about your response, you allow yourself to communicate more thoughtfully and intentionally, which can lead to better outcomes in both personal and professional interactions. Taking responsibility for your emotions is one of the most empowering steps you can take in your personal growth. It's easy to fall into the trap of blaming external circumstances or other people for how we feel. We often point to situations or individuals as the cause of our emotional reactions, thinking if they hadn't done this, I wouldn't feel that way, but in reality, we are the ones who are responsible for how we choose to feel and react. Recognizing that we have the power to manage and transform our emotions is a transformative realization that opens up a world of emotional freedom and personal control. The first step in taking responsibility for your emotions is recognizing that they are not caused by other people or external events. We often believe that our emotions are the result of something outside of ourselves: an argument with a friend, a stressful work situation, or an unpleasant interaction. However, emotions are actually internal responses to external stimuli. What triggers an emotional reaction is not necessarily the event itself, but how we perceive it. This is an important distinction because it helps us realize that we have the ability to change how we perceive things and therefore how we feel about them. For example, imagine you're stuck in traffic, running late for an important meeting. Many people might feel frustrated or stressed in this situation, blaming the traffic for their emotional state. However, the traffic itself isn't inherently frustrating. What makes it frustrating is how we interpret it. You could choose to see the traffic as an opportunity to slow down, relax, or listen to your favorite music or podcast. The situation hasn't changed, but your emotional response to it has. By taking responsibility for your emotions, you understand that you have the power to choose your response, even in circumstances that seem out of your control. This shift in mindset is essential for emotional maturity. When we stop blaming others for how we feel, we reclaim our power. We stop giving away our emotional well-being to things or people that we can't control. Instead, we take charge of our emotional state, which leads to greater inner peace and stability. Instead of reacting to events and circumstances as if we are victims, we start responding to them with intention, understanding that our emotions are our responsibility, not someone else's. Taking responsibility for your emotions also means acknowledging that you have a role in how you create your emotional experience. Our beliefs, attitudes, and past experiences shape how we interpret the world and how we respond to it emotionally. If you're constantly worried about being judged or rejected, for example, you might feel anxious or defensive in situations where others are simply being neutral. These emotional responses are not about what others are doing, they are about the way we filter the world through our own lens of beliefs and past experiences. When we take responsibility for our emotions, we begin to examine these filters and recognize that our emotional responses are not solely reactions to the world, but also influenced by our own patterns of thinking. This is an empowering realization because it gives us the ability to change how we think and, by extension, how we feel. For example, if you find yourself feeling resentful in relationships because of a past hurt, you might need to work through that hurt rather than letting it continue to color your current interactions. By taking responsibility for your emotions, you stop blaming others for making you feel a certain way and instead focus on what you can do to change your emotional response. In order to take responsibility for your emotions, it's also important to practice self-awareness. Self-awareness is the ability to observe your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors without judgment. It's about becoming the observer of your emotions rather than being consumed by them. When you are aware of your emotional triggers, you can pause and make conscious decisions about how you want to respond. For example, if you notice yourself feeling angry in a situation, you can take a step back and ask yourself why you're feeling angry. Is it because the other person said something you didn't like, or is it because you are projecting your own insecurities onto the situation? Understanding the root of your emotions gives you the power to deal with them more effectively. Self-awareness also involves understanding the underlying needs or values that are being triggered by your emotions. Often, emotions are signals that tell us something is out of alignment in our lives. For example, if you feel frustrated at work, it might be because you're not being appreciated or your values of respect and fairness are being compromised. By identifying these needs and values, you can address the deeper issue that is driving your emotional response. Rather than reacting with frustration or anger, you can take action to communicate your needs or make changes that align with your values. Another key aspect of taking responsibility for your emotions is owning your emotional reactions. It's common for people to deny or minimize their feelings because they don't want to appear weak or vulnerable. However, denying your emotions only leads to internal conflict and a lack of emotional resolution. When we take responsibility for how we feel, we are not only accepting our emotions, but we are also validating them. This doesn't mean that we act on every emotion we experience, but it does mean that we honor our emotions and give ourselves the space to fully experience them. For example, if you feel sadness after the loss of a loved one, taking responsibility for that emotion means allowing yourself to grieve and experience the full range of feelings that come with loss. It means acknowledging that sadness is a natural and healthy response to grief, rather than pretending that you are fine or pushing the emotion away. By giving yourself permission to feel, you honor your emotional experience and allow it to move through you rather than getting stuck in it. Taking responsibility for your emotions also involves self-compassion. When we are emotionally responsible, we stop criticizing ourselves for feeling a certain way. Instead of berating ourselves for being angry, anxious, or sad, we treat ourselves with kindness and understanding. We recognize that emotions are a natural part of being human, and it's okay to feel them. Self-compassion allows us to navigate our emotions without judgment, guilt, or shame. Finally, taking responsibility for your emotions leads to healthier relationships. When we stop blaming others for our emotional reactions, we communicate more openly and honestly. We can express how we feel without accusing others of causing our emotions. This fosters an environment of mutual respect, understanding, and emotional maturity in our relationships. Instead of creating conflict by projecting our feelings onto others, we take ownership of our emotions and work through them in a way that is constructive and respectful. In conclusion, taking responsibility for your emotions is a key element of emotional maturity and personal empowerment. By recognizing that our emotions are our own, we stop blaming external circumstances or other people for how we feel. We learn to observe our emotions, understand their roots, and respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Taking responsibility for our emotions is not about suppressing them, but about owning them, understanding them, and using them as a tool for personal growth and emotional well-being. Seeking validation from others is a natural human desire. We all want to feel seen, heard, and appreciated. However, when seeking validation becomes a constant need or obsession, it can undermine our self-worth and emotional well-being. The desire for approval from others, especially when it becomes the primary source of our self-esteem, can lead us down a path of dependence and insecurity. The truth is that relying on others for validation can trap us in a cycle of self-doubt and diminish our sense of inner strength. Learning to stop seeking validation from others is an essential step toward building authentic self-esteem and fostering personal empowerment. We live in a world where external validation is often seen as a measure of success. Social media, in particular, has amplified this need for approval, where likes, comments, and followers have become tangible markers of worth. Many people find themselves constantly measuring their value against the opinions of others, and when they don't receive the validation they crave, it can leave them feeling unworthy, rejected, or insignificant. The problem with seeking validation from others is that it places our self-worth in someone else's hands. We become dependent on others' approval to feel good about ourselves, and this creates an unstable foundation for our self-esteem. Self-worth cannot be based solely on external factors. It needs to come from within. The danger of seeking validation from others is that we allow other people's judgments, opinions, and actions to dictate how we feel about ourselves. We start to measure our success, happiness, and worth based on how others perceive us, whether it's a colleague's recognition at work, the approval of friends or family, or even strangers' opinions online. This can lead to a life that is overly focused on pleasing others and achieving external markers of success, rather than pursuing personal fulfillment and authenticity. To break free from this pattern, we must shift our focus inward. This shift requires a conscious decision to stop seeking validation from others and start cultivating self-validation. This means learning to recognize our own value, celebrating our unique qualities, and trusting ourselves to make decisions that align with our true desires and values. It means taking ownership of our emotions and actions rather than relying on others to tell us that we are worthy or capable. One of the first steps in stopping the need for external validation is to become aware of how much we rely on others' opinions. Pay attention to how often you seek approval from others, whether it's asking for feedback, seeking compliments, or trying to meet expectations that are not your own. For example, you might find yourself constantly trying to impress people or seeking praise for your accomplishments. This might happen in your personal relationships, at work, or even on social media. Recognizing these behaviors is an important step because it helps you identify when you are seeking validation rather than trusting yourself. Once you have identified this tendency, the next step is to ask yourself why you feel the need to seek validation. Often, the need for validation stems from a lack of self-confidence or feelings of insecurity. Deep down, you may not believe that you are worthy of recognition or praise without external validation. In this case, it's essential to build a sense of self-worth that is not reliant on others. This requires recognizing and embracing your intrinsic value, separate from the approval or opinions of others. To start this process, begin by practicing self-compassion. Instead of relying on others to make you feel good about yourself, learn to be kind and supportive to yourself. Speak to yourself the way you would speak to a close friend, with empathy, encouragement, and understanding. When you make mistakes or face challenges, treat yourself with patience and grace rather than self-criticism. This creates a solid foundation of self-worth that is not dependent on external sources of approval. Another way to stop seeking validation from others is to get clear on your own values and goals. When you are connected to what truly matters to you, you no longer need others to tell you that you are on the right path. Instead of chasing external approval, focus on aligning your actions with your values and aspirations. When you live according to your principles, the need for validation fades, because you no longer need to seek outside confirmation of your worth. Trusting your own judgment and instincts becomes more empowering than waiting for others to validate your decisions. In life, setbacks are inevitable. They can be small disappointments or larger obstacles that disrupt our progress. The key difference between those who maintain emotional balance and those who struggle is how we respond to these setbacks. Overreacting to minor setbacks can lead to unnecessary stress, anxiety, and frustration, often making the situation worse than it actually is. The ability to approach challenges with a calm, measured mindset is a powerful skill that can lead to greater resilience, productivity, and emotional well-being. When we overreact to minor setbacks, we tend to blow things out of proportion. What might initially be a small inconvenience can quickly become a crisis in our minds. This often happens because our emotional reactions are driven by fear, insecurity, or an inflated sense of urgency. We may fear that one failure will lead to a series of failures, or we may believe that every setback is a reflection of our capabilities. The problem with this mindset is that it leads to a spiral of negative thinking, making us believe that we are incapable of overcoming obstacles, when in reality, setbacks are a natural part of the journey toward success. One of the primary reasons we overreact to setbacks is because we feel a loss of control. When things don't go as planned, we can feel helpless, frustrated, or disheartened. This emotional reaction is especially common when we have invested significant time, energy, or resources into a project, relationship, or goal. A minor setback in these situations can trigger feelings of defeat and self-doubt. We may become overly focused on the negative, replaying the event in our minds and imagining worst-case scenarios. In doing so, we fail to acknowledge that setbacks are often temporary and can offer valuable lessons if we approach them with a clear and calm mind. Another reason for overreacting is a lack of perspective. When we are in the midst of a setback, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. We become fixated on the issue at hand, and our emotions cloud our ability to assess the situation rationally. A minor delay or obstacle might seem catastrophic in the moment, but when viewed in the context of our larger goals or life as a whole, it may not be as significant as it appears. However, our emotions, especially in moments of frustration or disappointment, can prevent us from taking a step back and gaining this necessary perspective. Moreover, overreacting can stem from perfectionism. Perfectionists often have high expectations for themselves and others, and when things don't go according to plan, they view even the smallest setback as a personal failure. They may believe that they are incapable of achieving their goals if they encounter any difficulty along the way. This type of thinking is detrimental because it undermines our ability to see setbacks as natural, necessary parts of the process rather than as reflections of our worth or abilities. Overreaction feeds into the perfectionistic mindset, which in turn amplifies feelings of frustration and defeat. To stop overreacting to minor setbacks, the first step is to recognize when we are overreacting. This requires self-awareness. Pay attention to your initial emotional reaction when faced with a setback. Are you immediately frustrated, anxious, or upset? Do you immediately assume the worst-case scenario? Are you catastrophizing the situation, imagining that this setback will lead to bigger problems? Awareness of these tendencies is the first step in breaking the cycle of overreaction. Once you recognize that you are overreacting, it's important to take a step back and pause. Give yourself space to breathe before responding. This moment of pause is crucial because it allows you to regain control over your emotions. When you pause, you give yourself the opportunity to assess the situation with a clear mind and to choose how you want to respond. In this space, you can decide whether the setback is truly as significant as it feels or whether it's a temporary obstacle that can be overcome with patience and persistence. One technique to manage your emotional reaction is to practice reframing. Reframing involves looking at the setback from a different perspective. Instead of viewing it as a failure or a sign that things are falling apart, try to see it as a learning opportunity or a temporary challenge that you can navigate. Ask yourself questions such as, what can I learn from this? How can this setback help me grow? Or is this setback truly as big as I think? Or is it just a small bump in the road? Reframing allows you to shift your mindset from one of frustration and helplessness to one of growth and possibility. It's also important to remind yourself that setbacks are a normal part of life. They happen to everyone, no matter how successful they are. Everyone faces challenges and obstacles along the way. No one's path is without bumps. Recognizing that setbacks are an inevitable part of life helps you detach emotionally from them. When you accept that setbacks are just a natural part of the process, they no longer feel like insurmountable barriers. Instead, they become opportunities to test your resilience and adapt. In addition, practice self-compassion when setbacks occur. Instead of berating yourself for not meeting your expectations, offer yourself understanding and kindness. Treat yourself as you would a friend who is going through a tough time. Recognize that you are doing your best and that setbacks do not define your worth or abilities. Self-compassion helps reduce the emotional charge of setbacks and makes it easier to approach them with a balanced perspective. Another useful technique for preventing overreaction is to create contingency plans. When you anticipate that things might not go according to plan, you are less likely to feel blindsided by setbacks. By considering possible challenges and thinking about how you would respond, you prepare yourself to handle setbacks with greater ease. For example, if you are working on a project and anticipate that there might be delays, you can mentally prepare yourself for the possibility and plan how you will handle it. Having a backup plan reduces anxiety and provides a sense of control, making it easier to stay calm in the face of setbacks. Lastly, learn to focus on the process rather than just the outcome. When we are solely focused on the end result, any minor setback can feel like a failure. However, if we focus on the steps we are taking, the progress we are making, and the lessons we are learning, setbacks become less significant. Each setback can be viewed as part of the journey, a small detour rather than a roadblock. By focusing on the process, we develop a greater sense of resilience and acceptance, which makes it easier to move forward without overreacting. In conclusion, learning to stop overreacting to minor setbacks is essential for maintaining emotional balance and resilience. By developing self-awareness, gaining perspective, practicing reframing, and cultivating self-compassion, we can learn to respond to setbacks with calm and clarity. Setbacks are an inevitable part of life, but they do not have to define us. When we learn to approach them with a level head and a positive mindset, we transform challenges into opportunities for growth, strengthening our ability to navigate life's ups and downs with grace and perseverance. The need for validation is a natural part of being human. We all desire to feel seen, heard, and appreciated. However, when the pursuit of external validation becomes a constant craving, it can hold us back from living authentically and achieving our true potential. Relying too heavily on others for approval can leave us feeling insecure, unfulfilled, and emotionally dependent. True fulfillment and emotional strength come from within, and when we stop seeking constant validation from others, we free ourselves to live more confidently and purposefully. At the core of seeking validation is the desire to be accepted. We seek reassurance from others to confirm that we are on the right path, that we are making the right choices, and that we are valued for who we are. In some ways, validation can boost our self-esteem and help us feel more connected to those around us. However, when we make validation from others the central source of our self-worth, we begin to compromise our authenticity and our ability to trust ourselves. One of the reasons we seek validation so frequently is because we are often taught to rely on external sources of approval from a young age. From school grades to social media likes to performance reviews at work, our culture encourages us to measure our worth based on what others think of us. While seeking feedback and constructive criticism can be helpful for growth, when our worth becomes tied to the opinions of others, it can create a constant cycle of dependence and insecurity. We begin to make decisions based on how others will perceive us rather than what aligns with our true values and goals. When we seek constant validation, we may find ourselves people-pleasing. People-pleasing is the act of constantly trying to make others happy, often at the expense of our own needs or desires. It stems from the belief that if we make others feel good, they will approve of us, and that approval will validate our worth. While it's natural to want to please those around us, when we become too focused on doing so, we lose sight of what we truly want and need. We may avoid setting boundaries, saying no, or expressing our authentic feelings because we fear rejection or disapproval. This leaves us feeling disconnected from ourselves and, over time, exhausted by the effort of trying to win others' approval. Seeking constant validation also makes it difficult to handle criticism or negative feedback. If our sense of self-worth is based on what others think of us, we become highly vulnerable to their opinions. A simple comment or judgment can derail our emotional state, making us feel worthless, incompetent, or undeserving. This creates a fragile sense of self that is easily shaken by the opinions of others. Instead of viewing feedback as an opportunity for growth, we take it personally, allowing it to undermine our confidence and leave us questioning our abilities. The problem with constantly seeking validation is that it leads to an external locus of control. When our self-worth is dependent on others' opinions, we give away our power to define who we are. We allow others to control how we feel about ourselves, which can leave us feeling disempowered and frustrated. We may constantly chase approval that is often fleeting or unreliable, only to find ourselves back at square one, seeking more validation. This cycle is exhausting and ultimately unsatisfying. No amount of approval from others can replace the deep sense of self-assurance that comes from within. To stop seeking constant validation, we must first learn to look inward for affirmation. We need to cultivate self-love and self-compassion, recognizing that our worth is not determined by external opinions. It's essential to build a relationship with ourselves based on acceptance and kindness. This means treating ourselves with the same love and respect that we would offer to a close friend. When we make our self-worth an internal, unconditional process, we no longer need to seek validation from others to feel good about ourselves. A key part of building internal validation is learning to trust our own judgment. We often look to others for confirmation of our choices because we fear making the wrong decision. But the more we practice trusting ourselves and making decisions based on our values, the more confident we become in our abilities. We begin to trust that, even if our choices aren't perfect, we have the ability to handle the outcomes. By embracing our own decisions, we reinforce the belief that we are capable and competent, reducing our need for external validation. Another important step in stopping the need for validation is learning to embrace imperfection. Many of us seek validation because we believe we must meet certain standards to be accepted.